My first point is simple. We've heard from the other speaker.
Tout d'abord, nous l'avons entendu de la part des autres orateurs, la communauté n'est pas vraiment en bonne voie pour la mise en œuvre de ces objectifs. La qualité du son, malheureusement, est difficile, donc les interprètes ne peuvent pas donner une interprétation complète. Il s'agit donc de la faim, des vulnérabilités croissantes et de la malnutrition. Nous reconnaissons que nous ne pourront pas trouver une solution en appliquant les mêmes recettes qui déjà ne marchent pas. Donc nous allons simplement continuer à nous éloigner de plus en plus. Il est donc important de réajuster nos politiques et nos stratégies. Il faut reconnaître le besoin de changement plutôt que de continuer à faire ce qui ne fonctionne pas. Et donc la communauté doit trouver une appréhension cohérente de ce que sont les inégalités. Nous sommes en fait dans un piège. Les ressources que nous canalisons vers notre processus de développement nous mettent dans un paradoxe où certains bénéficient plus que d'autres. L'économie mondiale est piégée dans une situation où il y a un écart global sur la demande, cela met la pression sur nos économies, un excès de liquidité et un accès limité au crédit pour les activités productives. C'est un paradoxe que les économistes modernes orthodoxes ne peuvent pas expliquer. Et pour le comprendre, il faut bien comprendre le cadre analytique des inégalités. Il faut donc tout d'abord reconnaître un changement fondamental des politiques qui nous attend pour faire les choses différemment plutôt que de continuer à accélérer. Cela m'amène à mon deuxième point. Bien souvent, lorsqu'on nous parle du fait qu'on n'est pas en bon chemin, on fait le lien avec le fait qu'il faut nourrir le monde entier, donc augmenter la production et la productivité. Et c'est un paradigme erroné. C'est non seulement cela induit en erreur, mais je dirais même que c'est une tromperie, parce que le problème n'est pas le manque d'alimentation. C'est une situation complexe avec de nombreux facteurs sociaux et économiques, y compris l'accès aux ressources pour la production. Malheureusement, le son a été interrompu. On constate des problèmes de surpoids, d'obésité, des épidémies. Et c'est pour cela que nous ne sommes pas en mesure de véritablement effectuer un changement de politique. Donc nous ne sommes pas... Malheureusement, le son est interrompu, donc les interprètes ne peuvent pas poursuivre l'interprétation. Nous en sommes désolés, mais le son est trop mauvais.
Third point, and connect very closely to the excellent intervention of my close friend Patrick. We need to think about food systems in a multidimensional manner, and we need to recognize the challenge of transforming them. Multidimensional because food systems serve and support multiple public objectives. It's not only about SDG 2, it's not about only livelihoods and production of food. It's about our health, it's about the health of our planet, our fundamental ecosystems. It's about our identity, our social relations, and it's about our cultural heritage. All of these are public objectives which are supported by food systems. And this is the reason why food systems are a critical entry point for public policies and public investment. And if we look at them with this multiplicity of objectives, food systems actually cut across the entire Sustainable Development Agenda, not only about SDG 2, but literally across most, if not all, the SDGs. And food systems are the cornerstones of the socio-economic transformation that we require to redress, address, and tackle the inequality question. Because no economy can transform and no society can transform in a sustainable manner without transforming its food systems and without improving the extent of our food sovereignty and the shifting of the balance in favor of our local food system, local production system, and all its knowledge base and cultural identities and heritage. So we're off track. The grand narrative doesn't help. We actually need to look at food system as being multidimensional across the entire agenda, a cornerstone of transformation, and a critical point to really redress these conditions of skyrocketing inequalities. Now, this is very much also the message we have for Patrick, but we need to recognize, and this is my fourth point, that when we're discussing about this food system transformation and SDG 2 in particular, we are really talking about a battlefield between two opposing worldviews. Two opposing worldviews of modernity on food and nutrition. Two equally distant production, marketing, and distribution systems. On one side, we have a corporate model that views food as a commodity and really looks at conquering consumer markets, very highly specialized process that can be delocalized everywhere, and has a very narrow defined productivity notion. On the other hand, we have a spectrum of local community response which are based on local small-scale production, often sometimes trapped into subsistence farming, and which view food as a fundamental human right and regards consumers as citizens and right holders. Now, these worldviews find the battlefield into the 2030 agenda and SDG 2 in particular. Now, that takes me to my fifth point. I mean, if we look at this tension between alternative production systems, where is the current agency? Now, we need to recognize that today are peasants who are feeding the world. Still, they are very, very often the most affected by malnutrition and vulnerability, but a percentage of the world equal to 62 to 75% is fed by smallholders, by small and medium-scale farmers. And the importance of this is particularly important because they feed the most vulnerable, very often in most vulnerable conditions, and this outweighs by far the caloric contribution to the food systems. And what is also interesting is not only that peasants feed the world, 62 to 75% of the world, but they use roughly 25% of the resources. So the ratio, the productivity ratio, is not what you expect it to be when you hear about the grand narrative. Quite the contrary, when you're looking at the industrial food system, you have a situation in which recent calculations show that for every $1 that consumers pay in the sort of global food system chain retailers, society pays approximately $2 in health and environmental damages. So you clearly have a system which is producing at much lower productivity than your normal narrative suggests, using roughly 75% of resources, with very significant externality on societies and with an unprecedented corporate concentration model, which is locking in this production system increasingly in many societies. So I'm sorry for being a little bit rude and crude. I know some of you are thinking that I am polarizing things a little bit too much. I am not, because the food system is based on a big gap in between. There is fundamentally no medium between these two extremes, between this very large corporate concentrated global food system and the small scale, sometimes subsistence farmers. So it is increasingly a polarization in which there is a missing middle. So that takes me to my sixth and semi-last point. When we look at the 2030 agenda, we often hear about the need of scaling up resources. Where are the resources for the implementation? Where is the financing? This is another misleading issue. The 2030 agenda is fundamentally a policy challenge rather than a financial challenge. And a policy challenge that needs to recognize that cohabitation between these two systems is very difficult, if not impossible, but at least very difficult. And in order to make it at least possible and to really strengthen those that are currently feeding the world in a very agroecological sound and community sound approach, we need to have a policy shift, a policy change, a set of policies that unambiguously support our peasants, strengthen local food systems, strengthen local seed system, strengthen their capacity to ensure the regeneration of our resources and our ecosystems. For many of us, this means shifting to agroecological approaches and circular economy approaches because they have a capacity to heal across so many different areas of our 2030 agenda, because they are based on that multidimensionality of development concerns that I spoke with at first. Now, that takes me to the very last point, Mr. Chair, and I hope I'm doing fine with time, which is if the 2030 agenda is a policy challenge and one that requires a shift in order to address our being off track, the issue of governance is central. And therefore, we need to address our governance system, recognizing that we need to have a food governance system which is based on some critical pillars. The first one is that we need to recognize the systemic nature of the challenges we are confronted with. We like to think that the ecological challenge, the livelihoods challenge, and our health challenge are separate. Yeah. So to conclude, it's a policy challenge. It's a governance challenge that needs to recognize that we need to rethink our institutional spaces for them to be able to address systemic issues, and that requires ex ante policy coordination rather than ex post, because the ecological have, in fact, different coins, different sides of the same coin. Now, the central role of this should be played by legitimate intergovernmental mechanisms, and in particular, the Committee on World Food Security, which is confronted with a process to define guidelines on food system and nutrition. But at the same time, we need to recognize that the governance is an ecosystem challenge. It's not about only one single institution, and therefore we need to strengthen the CSF process for it to be able to dialogue more actively with other intergovernmental processes related to trade, related to biodiversity, related to climate, related to food formulation, in a manner that ensures that its mandate can actually be met. The good thing about the CFS, and to conclude, is that not only it's intergovernmental and therefore member states based, but includes active capacity and a mechanism to ensure that peasants, which are today the primary contributors to food security, but also the most vulnerable, are actively engaged in the consultation and in the negotiation process. And therefore, that's a space that recognizes the need for inclusive decision-making when it comes to shaping the future of our food system. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much to all the participants.